Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and just give it a minute while we let people move from the waiting room into our main meeting space. We'll get started here shortly. All right. It looks like most people have made it over. Thank you again for joining us today. My name is Bethany Quinn. I am president of Golden Shovel Agency, and I am joined here today by a very special guest who you guys are going to love hearing from today. Charles Sexton is the principal and CEO of Strategic Location Advisors, a site selection company doing work all throughout the United States. So welcome, Chuck.
Hey, thanks for having me, Bethany. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I know you have so many fantastic insights to share today. Before we get started, just wanted to let people know some housekeeping notes. Feel free to use the chat to ask some questions. We will have a Q&A at the end, so that way you can ask some questions that might be more specific to your community. And we'll also be sharing some resources after the fact. Also, just to let people know who are unfamiliar with Golden Shovel Agency, we are an economic development strategy and communications firm. We help communities to tell their stories in effective and meaningful ways so that they can communicate with people like Mr. Sexton over here, a site selector, and really effectively win projects for their community. We work with over 300 different economic development organizations in over 41 states. And I'm going to let you talk about your company.
So Strategic Location Advisors, we primarily focus on two things. One is site selection, obviously. The other is strategic services for communities, states, power companies, and the like. And really, in the last 3 years, we have assessed 1,000+ communities and sites in 42 different states. So there's not much we haven't seen. To give you a little background on the type of projects that we work, it's literally just about anything you can imagine, from your small, I would say family-owned type manufacturing companies all the way up to $1.5 billion battery facilities, and all in between. So we do primarily focus on manufacturing, and have a specialty in doing foreign direct investment projects, primarily out of Canada, but we're actually branching into European markets pretty soon. But it's not officially announced yet. So.
All right, well, we're lucky. We got the unofficial announcement first. But what I love is that you guys do have so much experience working in many states. You said over 1,000 different sites assessed. So what you're going to be sharing today is not theoretical. This is not conceptual. These are actual tips and strategies from a site selector who's been on the ground in communities just like yours. And that's super valuable to our audience. So thank you again for being here. So what we're going to cover today is how to get on the short list, right? Everyone's first goal before you land the project. RFI and RFP essentials, digital presence must-have, storytelling that goes beyond the numbers, and how to have high impact site visits, and what to do after the visit is complete, what that follow-up should look like.
As we go through this, I want to reiterate that I'm not trying to make anyone feel seen today. It is simply about things that I think are lacking right now, especially in the RFIs that I've been scoring this year, things that I've been, honestly, not just this year, the last few years. And so my colleagues and I in the site selection world have talked a lot about the basics, and I want to make sure we cover those today. We're not going to cover everything that I would normally cover in a long form session, but we are going to cover some things that are kind of pet peeves that I've been seeing, lacking a little bit lately. But most importantly, if you want to get on the short list, you got to have appropriate real estate. That's a really critical piece for economic developers and communities. Now, there are some communities out there who've been doing a great job, and actually some states who've been doing a great job on product development initiatives, where they're putting money into site development. If your state is doing that, I highly encourage you to make sure that during those funding cycles, you are prepared and getting opportunities ready for your community to get funding to help develop sites, get them ready, get them certified, get them build ready, whatever it might be. If your state does not do that, I encourage you to get with your state representatives to talk about how all of your competitors are starting to do it. People are really investing in real estate today. The other thing I will say is that on the last couple of site selection projects, we have seen more buildings available as well. So greenfield and build ready are certainly good to have, but you also need to start having more building options available too. The other thing about getting on the short list is being able to sell your value proposition as a community. You know, when we're looking at RFIs, certainly there are answers that we're looking for, obviously from a scoring perspective, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. But most importantly, it's how you position yourself in the RFI. That can be really critical to getting on the short list. And your value proposition at a basic perspective is, of course, property, utilities, labor, training, and access. And by access, I mean logistics, supply chain, you know, having that the ability to look at the project from the standpoint of what that company does. You know, certainly our firm tries to give you as much information as we can without giving away who the company is. And so, you know, when we're doing an RFI and we're looking specifically at supply chain, especially those critical suppliers, you being able to show that and research that and give us that information is really important. And you can go ahead, Bethany, on the next slide. Um, I will say the other thing that's important as well is being aggressive. There are some communities out there who do a really great job at this, but I don't see it often enough. Um, there aren't as many who even put a cover letter on their submission. Now, that's not a requirement. It's not always asked for, but there are some communities who have that as sort of a basic SOP, standard operating procedure for them, is they'll put a cover letter on there whether or not we ask for one. And in that cover letter, they're pushing their value proposition. They're talking about being aggressive with landing the project. That's an important way to do it. There are some consultants, we do this. There are a couple of others I know that do too. We give you some open-ended questions in there about why we should pick your community. That's another place that you can be aggressive in talking about those things. Local incentives are certainly important to know about. They're not going to, they shouldn't win you the deal. I will say that, number one. Your location, obviously from a geography standpoint, supply chain, those should be the most important things to the project. If a company is looking for just incentives, you need to be wary of that. But incentives do sweeten the deal on the back end. So getting to the short list, those things can help. And we have started to see some communities and even some states who have started to offer low interest loans, for example. So if you're a community out there that wants a good local incentive, if you can figure out a way to do a low interest loan during this current environment of high interest rates, that's something that might help you get on the short list. And then showing successful deals, that's another way to be aggressive. If you can show how you've helped an existing industry, that's critical because I certainly want my clients to be in a community that the economic development agency is continuing to help them grow. So if you can give a story, a short story, nothing super long, but you can show quickly how you helped an existing industry grow within your community. And then another thing that's really critical for us to see from showing successful deals is how you landed a new client and helped them ramp up their workforce when they did their initial hiring. That's another thing that's really important right now. All right, we're going to transition to some essentials on the RFI, RFP, and I'm going to tell you right now, following directions completely is so important. You know, before I was a site consultant, I was an economic developer. And my first boss in economic development looked at me in the face and said, if you just fill out RFIs 100%, answer every question, and make sure it's accurate, you'll be better than 80% of the economic developers and communities out there. Now, whether or not that was true at that time, I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that right now, if you're doing that, I would probably say you're better than 90%. You would not believe the amount of RFIs that we get that questions are left unanswered. And we'll talk about that a little more. But just remember, you're competing against 50 to 150 communities at this stage. You're not on the short list yet at the RFI. So making sure that you do that basic really basic part of your position, which is getting that RFI completely filled out appropriately and accurately is really important. The other thing that I've seen lately, folks aren't paying attention to the directions on attachments. Sometimes we ask for things to be sent separately in a folder that's online that we can download, but there are certain projects where we don't have to have, for example, we don't have to have the geotech if you have a building on the site, but for some reason we'll get 20 attachments when we're looking at a building, and that just gives clutter to when we are trying to score your location. And so if we ask, for example, if we ask for you to put all attachments into one PDF, please do that. The reason that we're asking for that is to reduce our time in finding the information that we need to look at when we're scoring. Most consultants, as you probably have heard this, we grade on a scale of 0 to 10. Now, every question will have a specific weight that's behind that. It's a multiplier of the 0 to 10. Don't worry about that piece. You're never going to get all 10s, though, on any of these questions. That's not possible. I've never seen that. I will never see that on any location. Your goal when you're filling out the RFI is to reduce the amount of zeros. And you're going to get zeros on unanswered questions. And I think this next slide gives you an example of what's wrong with this picture. Certainly, I think most people are going to obviously quickly notice that they didn't even answer the gas question. Obviously, if you don't answer a question about gas, I'm going to think that you don't have it. There are some communities out there struggling with gas right now, gas coming into their community in capacities. But the other thing that's a huge problem for you if you do this in an RFI is if we ask for an average industrial rate and you put the name of the power company and then you just put in the contact information of the power company representative instead of the average industrial rate, you're probably going to get zeros across the board on every single one of these questions when you're scored. And there's also a possibility you're going to get cut because, like I said before, you're competing against 50 to 150 locations. And if 50% of them have filled this out appropriately and they have the right real estate and they're in the right geography, there's no reason to waste time scoring yours when we're going to have to either come back to you or call 5 different people to get the information that we asked for. It is so important that you fill this out and actually put the answer in there rather than putting a contact name in there. That's a huge pet peeve. And it's not just a pet peeve of mine. This is a conversation I've had with other consultants. Our time is very, very important. It's critical. We basically bill on time. And so the more time we waste hunting down information, the worse it is for your score on the RFI. And you can go to the next one, Bethany. And that really leads into the fact that, giving more, if you're causing us to waste time, it's going to hurt you. And I don't know, you jumped forward there, Bethany, I think, on one there. Can
Oh,
you
let's
go?
go back.
Yeah, like I said, if you're wasting our time and causing us to spend more time tracking down information, it's just going to continuously hurt your positioning, not just your score, but how you're viewed from the consultant. And I will tell you, not answering questions and pushing us off, it signals either incompetence, laziness, or you don't want the project. So if you can't answer that question, it tells me, well, that this economic developer may not know what they're doing. They may not have a relationship with the power company. That's concerning if you don't have a relationship with the power company. If the power company is not willing to give you that information because you're an economic development professional, that's also a concern because every other power company in the United States that I deal with, they're giving average industrial rates to their economic developers. Why is your local one not doing that? It could also signal laziness that, okay, well, the economic developer would rather do something else than complete this RFI. Well, that means to me, that tells me they're not in tune with their position. What if my client goes there? They're not going to take care of my client. They're going to continue that, least path of resistance. And then, of course, not wanting the project. And, we don't want to send our clients anywhere where they're not wanted. And so, again, that's why you have a high likelihood of getting eliminated in the RFI stage if you're not answering questions or if you're pushing us off onto somebody else. All right, you can hop to the next one, Bethany.
All right. So we want to talk about digital presence must-haves. So again, if you're not online, you do not exist. These are conversations that I have had with Chuck as far as things that he wants to see on there online. Do you want to go into these and I can go through some examples?
Yeah, sure. Certainly a modern website is important. If we go on your website and it's hard to find information, that's a red flag immediately. The biggest pet peeve that I have, again, site consultants, we all talk to each other, especially if we're at a conference together and we get some downtime and it's just a few of us sitting around. We sit around and there's a lot of times we're telling horror stories or things that I saw this again. Are y'all seeing this again? And the big one for a lot of us is your contact information. So let's say we do decide to keep you in after you've pushed us off or you didn't give us enough information. And then we go to your website and instead of your direct number or your email address being on there, it's a fillable form to contact you. Then it's extremely apparent that you don't want to speak to anyone that might have an opportunity for your community. So I cannot stress enough. If you don't list your staff, your emails, your office phone, and your cell phone numbers, it is a huge signal that you're either too good to talk to somebody or you're not interested in doing deals in your community. A good organized database for your available sites and buildings is really important as well. We don't want to spend a whole lot of time trying to track down information. And look, this happens where, we go through an RFI process and you send us information and you send us exactly what we've asked for. But we want to see if there's some extra info. Maybe as we're going through the presentation with the client, they say, hey, we didn't talk about this, but we'd like to know if this building has chillers. Oh, okay. Well, let me go through and see if it just lists it on their website, the equipment that's within that building. By the way, that's another thing as you're inventorying your buildings. It's really important to make sure that any equipment that is in that building, you have inventoried well and it's on the listing on your website. That's another big thing that's really important too. Good data. A lot of communities will have a Jobs EQ or an MZ plugin or something like that, or Lightcast plugin. Those are all good resources of information. But that data, I call that black and white data. I can pull that data at any time on your community. And so if we're preparing to come for a site visit, for example, and we see that your labor participation rate is below the national average, I'm going to ask you why that is when we get on the site visit. But if you can put information that you have gleaned, if you do a labor study, for example, labor shed study, and really are trying to showcase what your labor advantage is, having that marketing of, yes, we have a lower than average labor participation rate, but here's how our community is getting people back in the workforce, and you showcase this fantastic workforce program that's getting adults back in the workforce, that's a selling point. So understanding your community, understanding what your potential flaws might be, but then highlighting and marketing how you are fixing those and actually turning them into opportunities for new companies to come in is a great thing for you to do. Clear branding. We've talked about value proposition. The other thing that I think is important is easy to understand maps. There's a lot of communities, and I'm not saying this is necessarily a wrong thing, but they'll have mapping that's Google based. Obviously, Google's got great mapping, but if you have the ability to do this, to create your own internal mapping that's on brand and it's a marketing type piece that you can use both on your website as well as when you're promoting your community, either in the RFI or when we come for a site visit. Those are really important to have. Because I want you to remember, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later too in site visits, you're trying to make sure that people are acclimated to your location. Never assume that myself, the site consultant, or the client knows anything about where you are. You have to make sure that anything you talk about from a location standpoint, you can point to on a map. And the really what I call the best in class communities, they have their own maps that are created, branded, and look really sleek and really nice and can showcase what those assets are, where the site is at, where you're at from a location standpoint in reference to major markets, those sorts of things. And then when it comes to marketing videos, the other thing that's a big pet peeve, like on a site visit, is if we sit down and you're going to show us an 8-minute video. We don't need to see an 8-minute video, but a nice 30-second highlight, like a 30-second commercial, that's a good thing. Yeah, give us a good 30-second quick hit of your top assets and your value proposition in a video. That's good. Anything
Yeah,
you
thank
think
you for
of that,
that.
Bethany?
Well, I'm going to walk through some examples I know that you and I have talked about. Here's an example again, modern website. This is Advanced CT. They just won Gold Award at IEDC. So very proud of that site for anyone who wants to go and check that out. But definitely an example of a modern way to present information and data. Chuck just mentioned, obviously, it's important to be very clear in providing your contact information. It should be on your homepage. Look, right here, big arrow, you can't miss it. But it also should be with your staff. So you can see right here, if you look at Lisa, you can click on her phone number and her email, and you can get straight to her instead of to that form.
I love that you
I
use Lisa on here. I hope is
Yeah,
she on the webinar? I don't know if she is or not, but I haven't seen Lisa in a little while. So
I don't know if you are Lisa. If you are, hi Lisa. But yeah, Lisa's great. So that's the whole thing, right? Is you want to be able to reach people quickly. And I love how you pointed out that if someone has a form and that's the only option, you're probably moving on because it just takes too long. You mentioned earlier how important it is to be able to quickly access sites and buildings, and providing multiple pathways to do so is something that we highly recommend because you don't necessarily know how many pages people are going to go to, right? So obvious buttons, images, everything has to be really clear and really easy.
yeah, when I was an economic developer, I didn't understand the importance of submenus, but now as a site consultant, I certainly do.
Right. Yeah, get me there fast. You don't have to go back to it. We talk about telling that story, right? The value proposition. And one of the things that we really advocate for is making it so clear and not having to just dig through content. I love this graphic for Evanston by the numbers. I mean, this could be whatever you want to feature, but it's so in your face that you cannot miss some of their selling points. Odessa did the same thing. And this is just an example of an infographic with some of the data. Like Chuck said, I mean, like he can find all the data, but the infographic makes it super easy to digest. So that's something we recommend. This should be familiar for you. Good messaging, low risk, low cost. Again, make it clear why people should come to your community. Make it clear fast. One of the things that I always tell folks is if you sound like Anywhere USA, you're not going to be memorable, right? So you have to make sure you know your value proposition and you repeat it and it is so clear.
Yep.
And
The
of
other thing
course,
too,
contact.
that's a good point, Bethany, because we're working with a community right now, and I won't say the name of the community, but they have the same name as a community in another state, and well, actually,
Mhm.
this town name is in a lot of states, and their marketing doesn't have their state name on it. And I'm like,
Oh no.
you gotta understand that it's important for people to understand which of those cities you're talking about in marketing.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, don't make people guess who you are or where you are. This is just an example of, you mentioned a branded map, and of course, this is just a small portion of it, but you talked about the importance for site selectors to know where are you in the country, right? So here in Auburn, they started, okay, we're in Washington State, so we're all the way over here. Where are we in Washington? And then where am I situated within the region? So this is a good example of being able to drill that down. One of the things that you had told me, which I thought was interesting and probably something we don't all think about, is how long a site selector might be on the road. So it kind of makes sense that if you're flying and driving all over the place, you need to be reminded of where you are in that moment.
Yeah, and this is a good example of what I was talking about earlier from the standpoint of having your own branded mapping. What this does is it allows, me to see where Auburn, because I've been in this area a ton. Okay.
Mhm.
So I've been in Seattle, Bellevue, Tukwila or Tukwila, whatever. I don't, and even Kent. I have no idea where Auburn is. I could not have, you could have paid me $1 million. I couldn't have told you where that was. The other good thing about this is it gives me frame of reference for other places that I've been.
Mhm.
And so I know them. Oh, okay. So, all right, I've been to Tacoma and Kent and even Renton. I did not know where Auburn was though. And then two, it takes away all of the clutter from a Google map. So a Google map, a
Mhm.
regular map like that is going to have so much clutter on it. And this is simplifies it and makes it easy to see, makes it quick to see.
Yeah, and I think one thing I wanted before we move on this, I want to point out is a lot of economic developers that we speak with are on the fence as far as how much they want to focus on their proximity to a major metro because they want to stand out. They don't want to feel like they're just part of that metro because they feel like their community is something they're proud of. They want to stand alone. I get it. But based on what you're saying now, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that even if you have the best community in the world, you still need to orient yourself by a major metro, a site selector will know. Is that what you're saying?
Yep, 100%.
Okay. So just that's a little tip for everybody to keep in mind. It doesn't take away from your value, but it does make sure they can recognize where you are. Bloomington EDC did this really well too with their branded map because they actually put the distance to those metros.
Nice. That gives you an idea. So, what does that tell me as a site consultant? It gives me an idea of some of the closest international airports too. So if I have FDI
Mhm.
clients, it's how far is this for them when they fly in from out of the country?
Yeah, that's good insight. Thank you. All right. And you talked about a short video, kind of brings it together. All right, I wanted to pause it. We went to the next slide. It works. But anyway, I wanted to show that video because it actually brought in several of things that you were asking for.
Yep.
Short video, you had the map right away, you see the drive times right away, you saw the infrastructure assets as far as the road transportation. Obviously it did even show the sites themselves and what was possible to be built there. I don't know for you, how important is that to have an example of a mock-up site? Do you feel like your clients benefit from that, or is it just depending on
It,
the situation?
that's a good question. It depends on the client, but it's certainly better to have it than not to have it because if you're looking at a site from a possible, whether it's retail, commercial, or it's industrial, any kind of visualization of what it can look like is good, as long as what you have visualized is backed up at least by some architectural engineering work. You don't want to
Mhm.
you don't want to show something on the site that you just came up with on your own because that's kind of false advertising. So again, as long as it's backed up by architecture and engineering firms who've done some work on your site and they've done a 2D flat plat of what that could accomplish, and then you have it made in 3D, perfect.
Awesome. All right, thanks for that tip. And then in regards to obviously featuring different industry opportunities, that's something that we often recommend. Um, Now, as far as storytelling, you have some really good examples that we put in here. I'm excited to hear you talk about how data can come to life.
Yeah, so obviously everyone knows that the country is facing major workforce issues, and we won't dig into why that is. But at the end of the day, it's really not about what your available workforce is anymore. Certainly, we're going to dig into that from a data standpoint of what we think we can pull from existing workforce and labor. But more important now and typically higher weighted when we're scoring an RFI, for example, or scoring once we get past the site visit, because the scoring doesn't stop once the site visit comes, by the way. We continue to score and refine those scores. So being able to showcase what your talent pipeline is and how you are training for the future and how you can quick train. So those two different types of workforce
Mhm.
training. So your talent pipeline and what you're doing in your high school systems, we're scoring those higher than we ever have. It's what do those CTE programs look like? We're looking for high schools that have really strong facilities and programs, especially if those match, the workforce needs of this client as they get built. Because you got to think about it, if it's a significant enough project, even a small project, I'm just going to say a smaller project that's, one of the recent ones we did was a 150 jobs, $65 million project and it would have been built over a period of 2 years. Okay. Well, we go to the high schools, we know that they're going to be hiring people that don't have to have a college degree, but they do have to have something that is like post-secondary. So if you're getting certifications that are post-secondary certifications in your high school system, boy, does that really excite companies. It excites me, obviously, when I'm seeing it. So, going through these high schools and seeing mechatronics or even industrial automation, robotics, machining, there's school systems that we've seen aviation programs in, aerospace, and even beyond that into your white collar jobs, because that's the other thing you have to remember about manufacturing is that manufacturing has so many other types of jobs that you can have. It's very diverse because you have accounting and finance, you have marketing, you have sales, you have business, you have all kinds of things. And honestly, if you have a company that's coming from overseas, especially a German company, they may want to put a cafeteria on site. So they need culinary within there. They're going to employ their own chefs, their own people who are cooking and serving for their employees. Some of you all may have some of those facilities. And so having all those different things are really important within your high school system, and seeing how they transition from high school to receive their post-secondary credentials. Again, we're not talking bachelor's degrees necessarily. They could be associates, or they could just be industry certifications for mechatronics or something like that. And so that's really important. We've seen some great ones. I'm a big fan of Amarillo, Texas's AmTech program. But I've also seen some great examples in the Carolinas of these CTE programs. I'm actually trying to help right now. Next week, I'll be in a strategy session with a community that's right next door to where I live, McCracken County, Kentucky, because they know I'm looking at these CTE programs across the country, and they're trying to create one here. So their superintendent reached out to me and asked me to participate in their strategy sessions to help guide them on what they need to do to be a partner with economic development, which I think is great that they reached out. And then when you think about it from the standpoint of your training programs that are quick start programs. So the training programs that are helping, say, adults or people who are slightly underskilled but have the mechanical aptitude to be upskilled quickly for these positions when you're bringing a new company in. That really goes back to your state more than anything. States that have really great quick start training programs. I know Virginia got ranked number one, and Virginia has a great one. I remember when they first got that started, and it's just continued to get better. I still think AIDT in Alabama is number one. That's just me, and that's how I score it, by the way. But Ready SC in South Carolina is fantastic. North Carolina is really, really good. Georgia, Mississippi, and Louisiana actually have really good programs. But if you're in a state that does not, and there are states that don't have great quick start training programs, I highly recommend as a community figure out how you can impact that recruit, screen, and train, and make that part of your value proposition when you're trying to sell a company on coming to your community. Oh, you've got some
Yeah,
Amtech. I didn't even look at the screen.
yeah,
You've got Amtech information on here from Amarillo. That's great. Yeah,
yeah. I know. You told me that the hallways for each different specialty was bigger than a lot of schools you've been in. I thought that was interesting.
yeah. The high school in Amarillo. So Amarillo is a fairly significantly large town. I mean, it's 200,000 plus people, and they have in their independent school district, they have five different high schools. And they took an old mall in Amarillo and refurbished the entire mall. They started with the Sears when the Sears went out, and then basically took over the entire mall. And so when you walk into the center of it, you have these boulevards that are
Mhm.
specific. So you have one that's really all about manufacturing, and you walk down that one, and you've got machine tool technology, you've got welding, you've got robotics, industrial automation. And they go further than that too. So the kids who are in the high school aren't just getting industry certifications in robotics, for example, but they're also on a team that competes in robotic competitions around the region and around the country. You've got aviation and aerospace in there. Then you'll go down another hallway and you've got all the trades. You've got carpentry, electrical, HVAC, all that stuff is in another hallway. You've got a hallway for business and marketing. They've got three culinary kitchens in there, three commercial kitchens in this place. They've got finance. They've got it all. I mean, really, it's the best one I've ever seen. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure we talked about that example because if your state does not have a robust program, this is an example of doing something at the local school district level. And not everyone has an empty mall that needs to be refurbished, but most communities do have space that needs to be repurposed. So fantastic example.
Yeah, the reason this is happening, this is my theory. So technical colleges have, in so many areas, been combined with community colleges. And unfortunately, and this is nothing against colleges, it's really about how they're funded. There's a lot of places they're funded based on the amount of associate degrees that they pump out versus how many people are actually ready for the workforce. And it's just been a detriment to them. And it's killed a lot of your technical trades, your technical programs in that higher education, that post-secondary environment. And what we have seen is the communities and high schools in certain areas have taken it upon themselves and said, you know what? We realize that we have to prepare these kids for the workforce, and we're going to create that here so they can get those post-secondary certifications here in high school.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And in conversations we're having too, it's about, like you said, telling the story. You don't have the talent today. What are you going to do to build it? And, that's just a great example of the community doing that. You kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but is there anything you wanted to share further on demonstrating support?
No, just reiterating the fact that having a couple of examples of how you've helped a company really helps further your value proposition as a community, helps you sell your community. And I know I've said the word sell a lot, but in reality, as an economic developer, you're really that top salesperson for your community. You are trying to market and sell that community to the world, to the globe. And so having these types of examples of satisfied clients, when we're working with a site selection potential client, guess what they want to see? They want to see examples of satisfied clients when we're talking to them. And so you have to do the same thing about satisfied clients in your community.
So I will just say, Golden Shovel clients, those of you who are on this meeting, when our copywriting team is pestering you for contact information so they can write success stories on your behalf, this is why. Because when they do that, they're getting those testimonials that site selectors like Chuck are going to be reading when making a decision on the type of support that you provide. We are pestering with purpose. Just keep that in mind next time you get an email. I did want to just show a couple examples too of sometimes telling your story means sharing accolades as well, because this might not be something that comes across in the data. Broken Arrow named the most livable small city in America. You wouldn't get that just by reading the demographics. So it's up to you as an economic developer to make sure you share those types of accolades.
Hey, I have to say, I like the folks in Broken Arrow too. They get real aggressive. They've competed on a couple of projects for me the last couple of years, and they do a good job.
Yeah, they're a client of ours and they're fantastic.
All right.
All right.
Site visits. Let's get into it. This is something that again, after becoming a site consultant, I really thought that everybody understood, how to perform a site visit well, and they just don't. And so I want to make sure you all understand these basic things about making sure you have a great site visit when you're hosting a company. And number one, keep in mind, we have been traveling for days on end. We're going from hotel to hotel, from town to town. And the better you can make a comfortable environment, the better you're going to be seen by the company. And I'm telling you right now, of course, I've heard rumblings out there of, wow, we don't want to treat them like they're VIPs. These companies come into town, they want us to roll out the red carpet. It's not to make them feel important. It's to make them feel comfortable. So the more you can do that, the better. And think about it and when you're scheduling your day with them, try to build in a bathroom break or two. Make sure that they can do that when they're there. If they're spending the night, make sure that you're doing things to make them comfortable in that manner too. And we'll talk about that in a second. We've got some more slides on that in a minute.
Yeah, I just cracked up at this nice little meme here. The
Yeah,
reality
so
is
a lot of you
people
all
are
may not know.
people, right?
I've started doing some teaching, and so I do like the Heartland Basic course. I didn't get to do that this year. I had to cancel on them, which I apologize if anybody was at that. But also the Advanced Symposium. So South Carolina has its own certification program for economic developers, and then after you get certified, you have to do an advanced program. And so what you're seeing here are some of the things that I've talked to them about. And I made a bunch of memes for them to look at when we're doing that education program.
Yeah, but truly it is a reminder, right? Site selectors, they're not robots, they're people. Make them comfortable. and they'll be a lot happier. All right.
Yeah, this is another one too. I've had a situation where I've flown into a community and they're not there to greet us. We don't know where we're going. We've not been there before. Please don't do that to people. Don't do that to
Mhm.
prospects that are coming into your town. You've got to take care of them. Pick them up from the airport. Make sure you know what time they're landing. If it's a commercial airport, certainly get that timing if you can from your state project manager, or if you're talking to the consultant directly, make sure that they give you that info. You need to know when they're going to be there and show up. Be there waiting for them with a nice vehicle that's cooled down. If it's a hot summer day, make sure it's not sweltering in the vehicle. If they're flying in private, same thing. Find out what the flight details are and pick them up at your local airport if they're flying in private. Please do that.
And don't leave them stranded at the airport.
No. Transportation and travel. I'm telling you right now, I just mentioned it. Make sure that it's cool. You've got to have, everybody has a car dealership in town. Most people do. Have a good relationship with them and borrow a nice SUV. If you don't have that, try to find a way that you can rent a van, especially if it's a large entourage. I mean, sometimes if it's a big project, we'll have 6 people on the site visit team. A good example of that, you see over there, obviously the picture of the Beverly Hillbillies. We don't want to ride around like that. Number one, we don't be crammed into a vehicle, an open air vehicle like that. But number two, that little picture down in the corner, we were on a site visit. I won't name the town to not embarrass them, but it was a university town, and this was on $1 billion project. And one of the executives from the company had gone to that university, graduated from their engineering program. So he really wanted to give them a chance. He felt like, because engineering was really important to their workforce, and they wanted good engineers to come out of this college and come to work for them. We get there and they cram us into a van that is clearly used for frat parties because it had a stripper pole right in the middle of it. Don't do that. Go find a better looking vehicle than that because we don't want to be crammed in there. And look, whether you think so or not, they kind of smell. If they're used for frat parties and stuff, they smell. The other thing was the van didn't have the air conditioner wasn't working on it. It was 105 out that day. And so the entire time we were on their bus, traveling around, looking at the community, looking at the site, all we could think was get us out of this van. We're sweating through our clothes. We're making fun of the stripper pole. We weren't listening to a thing that the economic developer was saying to us. We weren't paying attention to it because we were so uncomfortable, so hot, and it was just weird being in that van. They got
Yeah,
cut, by
that's
the way. They got cut as soon as we left. They were cut.
I have a feeling they got cut as soon as you realized there was no AC.
Yeah. Yeah. Another way to make an impression, a gift box for your prospect. That goes a long way, makes them feel welcome, makes them feel wanted. That's the other thing. It's not just making them feel welcome, it's making them feel wanted in your community. Because I'm serious, you wouldn't believe the amount of communities we go to, and we can tell immediately if the community wants us or not. I have been on
Hmm.
site visits where before we get there, based on how they're going to handle us, we can tell. I said it getting to a community in Georgia. I said, I don't think this community wants us here before we got there. And then that feeling grew the entire time we were there. But I will tell you, if you can put together a gift box, especially if you have something that's local,
Hmm.
that's really nice that you think they would like. If you can do a little bit of research beforehand, please do it. Obviously, a lot of people know I like bourbon, so that ends up being a gift a lot of times. It does not have to be that expensive of a gift. But if you know they're flying, that's a pro tip. Make sure you offer to ship the gifts to them afterward. Ask them for an appropriate address. Usually they're going to give you their office, not their home address, because a lot of people don't want to reveal what their home address is. But that's actually a picture. I did a site visit in Branson a few months ago, and they had a whole big gift basket for me. But that was the coolest piece because they know I golf, and that was like a golf centered mug that I actually use on the golf course now. So another big one. This is another. Please remember if you are feeding your prospect on the site visit, do everything you can to find out if there's food allergies or if there are food preferences before you serve anything. We went to one in a state on the East Coast, Southeast Coast. Flew in. They asked us before we got there if there were any food allergies or food preferences, and we told them yes. One of the executives from the company is a vegan. They still served a full barbecue spread and didn't do anything special for the executive who was a vegan. And the detriment to the community was that person, even though they weren't the CEO, they were actually the person that was going to make the decision on the site. The CEO was leaving it up to them because they ran the manufacturing facilities for the company, and he was the vegan. And so if this spread, the only thing he could eat was the baked beans that didn't have pork in them, thankfully, and coleslaw. That's what he had for lunch that day. And so that, and honestly, Raj, he was very humble. He didn't care. He was fine with it. But the CEO was livid that they did not cater to one of his executives when they knew they asked, they knew. So make sure you're figuring those things out, especially today when so many people have gluten allergies. You really need to know how to cater to them when they're coming to your community.
I actually do want to just chime in here and point out to you, said something really important, and that's that you don't know who's actually making a decision out of the entire group. So treat everyone with an equal level of respect or care, regardless of their title.
Yep,
That's also a good tip.
agreed. We talked about this a little bit earlier. When you're starting your presentation on the site visit, you want to orient the client and the consultant to where you're located. Even if I've come to your community before for a site visit, doesn't mean my client has, doesn't mean they know where we are. And so I think a good rule of thumb is that as you start your presentation, start with location and start with that 30,000-foot view of where you're located at minimum within a 500 to 600 mile radius, but it's always best practice, especially if they're an FDI client, to just start with a map of the United States with all those major cities on it. Chicago, New York, Atlanta, all those need to be on it so that they know where they're at. And then you're zooming in. So the next map needs to be one that's 500-mile radius that shows major markets and your location in the center of those major markets. And then you zoom in even farther and you've got a big regional view of, let's say, what your labor shed pull is, maybe a little farther than that, an hour to 2 hours. All right, what are those major markets in an hour to 2 hours? Where are the interstates at? Where's the rail at? If you have ports, you want to put the ports on there and your airports, those sorts of things. And then you zoom in further to your community as a whole and where the site is, and then into your aerial of your site. So you want to orient them to where they're at in the world so that they know where they are. It happens too often that communities just start talking about things that we know nothing about. Oh yeah, over here in this town over here of Branson or whatever, and we've never heard of that town or whatever. We need to know where we're at. And then I put you a nice little piece on here. This was Project Spirit. I worked this project a couple years ago, but the client really loved this. So as we sat down for our meetings, and they were bringing engineering in and utilities in at different times, while we were sitting there, they had nameplates for everyone who was in there, and on the back of them, they had the agenda, everyone we were meeting with, what their titles were, their company, and the CEO of the company really liked that. He thought that showed an attention to detail, and it elevated the community in his mind. And so, just another little pro tip there.
That's great.
Small little things can make a big difference when you're doing a site visit.
And
Another
I am
big,
gonna, Chuck, I am gonna just, go through the slides a little bit faster now because we have 8 questions and I want to make sure people
okay,
have time to
all
ask
right.
you them. Okay.
Real quickly, make sure you're checking out your sites before the site visit. If it's a building, go make sure it's clean. If it's a site, make sure there's nobody on it. I'm telling you right now, I have gone on a site visit and hunters came out of the woods and they're in their orange and we've been hunting this for 50 years and they think that so and so farm owns it. No, that's not who owns it anymore. I won't go into the stories on these, but on the left, the horses. But on the right, this is a best practice as well. This was a site visit in South Carolina, and had been raining, and we were looking at a site that had a little bit of forestry on, a little bit of trees on it. And they said, "Look, we've got side by sides, and we can ride the site, or we've got our emergency personnel here who have a drone and a television, and we can fly the site." And we chose to let them fly it, and I could sit there and tell them where to fly the drone so we could see where the rail came in on the backside of the property, and we flew the property and the topography of it. It was really nice. So use technology to your advantage when you can.
Perfect. And yes, check out the site ahead of time.
Yeah.
This is actually one of our questions. So Brian, Chuck's going to answer it right here.
Elected officials, please do everything you can to limit their involvement in your site visit. Elected officials can be great. You can have a great elected official, doesn't matter, because the next go around they might not be a great elected official, and you've set a precedent that the mayor is with you in the entire site visit. Please keep their interactions brief. Have them come in and introduce themselves at the beginning of the site visit. If you're, let's say, set up for your meeting with all the utilities, you're about to do your presentation on the community to kick things off. Have the mayor come in, have the mayor say, "Hi, we're so excited that you're considering our community. You are in great hands with the team that we have here. We're certainly going to do everything we can to make sure you have an easy transition here and to make this a great deal for you. I have a very busy day today, but please reach out if I can do anything to help," and get them out of there. Because I've had elected officials say inappropriate things on site visits, and it really turns the client off.
Yeah, thank you for that.
In summary, all the things that we've talked about today, make it easy and stress-free for your guests. They've been traveling a ton. Check out your hotel rooms. Make sure the hotel rooms aren't dirty. Check them in before they get there if they're spending the night. Put gifts in there. Stock the refrigerator. Do things like that. Hospitality is not just being nice. It's showing them that you want them there. Find ways to wow them when you can. And the wow factors can be you have a great high school CTE program like we talked about. It could be things like that, but try to find ways to wow them and reduce red flags as much as you possibly can. And sometimes those red flags could be elected officials. A big thing right now, I'm gonna harp on the elected official thing. Politics is so incendiary right now. That's another reason you want to keep elected officials out of these prospect visits. And maybe it's not a political thing. I have seen, even when I was an economic developer, where an elected official found out about a project, found out what property we were marketing to the project, and let's say we had an option on it, or even if we didn't have an option on the property, and they go and tell the wrong person, and that person goes and buys that property out from under you, and it keeps you from doing the deal. I have seen it happen at least 3 times, and it's killed a deal and cost the community 100+ jobs. I had one community that almost cost them 200 jobs. So, and
All
Bethany,
right.
oh, there we are. Your
Yeah,
AirPods.
Chuck, thank you for that. I'm having some audio issues, guys, so I don't, hopefully I didn't just interrupt you, Chuck. I asked Victor if he can ask these questions while I try to figure it out. I will answer one real quick. Nikki, you asked about sharing who created the video that I displayed. Golden Shovel created that. We actually create all the examples here today. I don't know, Chuck, can you see the questions, the Q&A?
I
Give me a
can.
thumbs up
Yep.
if you can.
I can see them. Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna let you guys go through these Q&A where I try to figure out what's going on with my audio.
All right. The first one that got submitted, have you encountered EDCs that have submitted RFP responses that seem perfect, but you then find facts on the ground to be less optimal? How do you deal with that? Yes. I'll give you a good example of that. So this community got pretty far in the process on a project we were working, and this was a large project. This was $1 billion plus project where they submitted a site. The site was very good. It had a brand new distribution facility on it, power distribution facility on it. And it was the size we needed. Topography was perfect. It was in a location that was good from a transportation standpoint. We went and visited the site. And when we left there, they actually were #1 on the list because the EDC did a great job on the site visit and everything. And then when we started doing follow-up, to start getting our ducks in a row on financial pro forma and closing the deal, we asked to see the language in the contract for the site purchase. They had told us in the RFP that they had an option on the property, and come to find out they did not. And we ended up cutting them from the project because they were trying to switch us to a property that we didn't even get to visit. And so, being honest in the RFP is really important. But again, that's the reason we do the site visits. The site visits are to confirm that you have given us the information that we need to have to make the decision. Next question from Brian. Are you seeing more involvement from politicians and local citizens in your projects from the standpoint of NIMBYism? or just wanting to be part of the process. It depends on the community. Certainly, there are communities where we've seen elected officials get highly involved. And I'm going to tell you, it's a higher percentage chance that it's going to hurt the projects more than anything else. And yeah, there is the NIMBYism, not in my backyard stuff that's going on out there in Banana. If you've not heard Banana, that's build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. We see that a lot as well. And then, of course, your cave people, your citizens against virtually everything. So, elected officials, obviously, you as an economic developer, you have to instill the trust with your elected officials, whether those are local, state, or even federal at times, depending on how you do it, that when you land a project, you are going to give them all the kudos because elected officials are running on cycles. They want to make sure they can put good information out there and show that they're making things happen. Let them know that, hey, I'm going to give you all the kudos for this deal coming here. Can you share the association that created that video? Oh, okay, you got that one already. At least in Ohio, funding not necessarily tied to enrollment, but instead graduation and employment. And that's a good thing. I like seeing that. There are some states that do a better job than others when we talk about workforce training and colleges and how they're funded. And I really hope to see that more prevalent as we move forward, is that they're tying it to employment and success rates. To what do you attribute the poor level of communication, info, response, et cetera, that you're experiencing? I think there's a lot of things that tie into that. Some people just, I'll frankly say it. There are some people who just are lazy. They've got things that they think are more important. And, if you're an economic developer and you get an RFI for your community, you really need to be focused on completing that appropriately. I know of one right now, and actually we have been retained to help this community get better. We're doing a full strategic plan. We're going to do an organizational review of them because they've gotten 101 RFIs in 5 years. They're on a major interstate in the center of the country. And of those 101 RFIs, they've not landed one. And that's a problem. And their leadership sees it as a problem. And I already know that they don't answer questions in their RFIs, and that's a big red flag. I can guarantee you that's one of the reasons they're not getting projects. What is the experience like, or how can communities make it better for site selectors if the property is listed with a realtor? Pro and cons. So I can't speak for all site consultants, but I can speak for myself. If the property's listed with a realtor, I see that as a potential barrier to getting a deal done, especially if it's a national real estate company. They can be very difficult to deal with. It makes it harder if if you're competing against another community, let's say, and this is a prime example. When we do our financial pro forma and you're in the top 3 communities and we're looking at it from a financial perspective, and we compare that startup cost for the company to land in your community, and your real estate cost is causing you to be $2 million higher in startup cost for my client, but they really like your community, we're going to come back to you and ask you, how can you get that property rate or cost down? And if you have a realtor on board, that's going to be difficult. I have seen some communities who have said, hey, we own the property. We have a realtor that lists it just so that we can make sure we're covering our bases as from a promotion standpoint. And sometimes they'll already have a deal with the real estate agent that says, hey, even if we decide we're going to give this property away for free to land this deal, we're still going to make you whole, Mr. or Mrs. Realtor, on the commission. And that's the big part of it, is they want to make sure that they want to get made whole. Brian's back with thank you for mentioning food allergies. I'm telling you right now, the VP of my company, Ivy, and she goes on these site visits sometimes with me to these communities. Guess what? She just had a gluten allergy pop up. She's 30 something years old and just bam, has a gluten allergy. So it's become a problem. Are there any legal ethic restrictions in providing gifts to site selectors, especially if government entity is hosting? It depends on your state. So I would check your state laws and your local laws, but I've not seen a problem with it personally. There could be states where it's a problem. It's usually the opposite. So if the company decided to give a gift to an elected official, for example, there are typically laws against that. There's typically not any against a state giving them out or a local government entity giving them out. But usually that's why you want your EDC to be separate, if you can, from your local government. You know, some of the ones that run the best and run the smoothest are EDCs or EDOs that are 501c3s or even C4s or C6s that are separate from the local government so they can do the things that they need to do. We have a new employee with minimum experience. Is there a way that we can get someone to evaluate our community through the lens of a site selector so we know what to work on before we really start to push our community? Yes. Our firm does that. There's a lot of firms that do those types of things. Certainly, if you reach out to the right folks, you can have them come into your community, do an assessment. They can do everything from strategic planning to value propositioning to organizational reviews and organizational development. So yes, there are ways to do that, and we do that.
And I did share the screen with your contact information, so you may want to write that
Okay.
down,
Yeah.
whoever asked that question.
What's my favorite bourbon? My favorite of all time is probably Colonel Taylor Single Barrel, but I'm also a big fan of Weller 12 Year. Those are great ones. Everyday sipping bourbon, Buffalo Trace, Woodford. Those are great ones too. But there's some exotic ones out there that I really, really love, but I don't get my hands on those as often. I do have 96 bottles in my bar. So some of our best property is owned by a private entity. They do require an NDA for site information. So even though I can answer some of the questions, I can't in good conscience answer some of the questions without their consent. How do I deal with that in the RFI? That's a great question. And so if you're promoting property that a private entity owns and they are that secretive about their property, it may be beneficial for you to not promote that property. Now, if it is a property, because there are some properties out there that may have had some former chemical operations on it, maybe they're brownfields and maybe this entity owns it now, you have to develop the relationship with that entity so that you can have all the information that you need. And it really comes down to making sure that they understand, look, you're not going to be able to get rid of this property or sell this property if we don't have this information. So some of that is on the relationship building side of things. But if you can't get there and you can't fill that RFI out appropriately, it is going to be more difficult to get that information. Now, on the other side of that, because you may be in a special situation where you just can't do the things I just said, make sure that if you have the ability to do so, let's say in your cover letter, it says, "Hey, this is a great piece of property. We've answered what we can, but because of these reasons, there are certain things that until we get later in the process, we can't." And that can help shield you a little bit on the scoring potentially when you have that special situation like that.
I will also tell you that we will be sharing a copy of this with everyone who's registered, and feel free to share it with them because they might not understand how site selectors go through their scoring process and understand how critical it is for you to be able to share that information.
Yep. The last one I see is from Marlene. Hey, thanks, Marlene. I appreciate the compliment there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Chuck, for sharing so many good insights and for being willing to stay over time to answer these questions. Again, our contact information is up here on the screen. All the examples shared today were from Golden Shovel's work. We would love to help you do a better job of communicating your value proposition with site selectors. And as Chuck mentioned, if you need help looking at your community to see if you're ready, to see if your sites are ready, they do that work as well, which can be a fantastic preliminary step. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, guys.